Entrepreneurship and innovation is typically associated with MSMEs, and rightly so, because if you look at the role of MSMEs throughout the world, they have been primarily responsible for innovation and for entrepreneurial skills, but it is professional entrepreneurial skills that have made the big difference. Now, the role of the private sector, where MSMEs are really at the heart of, has become very important. But this was not always the case. As we know, immediately after independence, the government followed a policy of socialist track, and that, of course, led to licensing, control of production. Government took over many of the major primary industries like steel, power, petrochemicals. What was left to the private sector was under a lot of licensing and controls. And therefore, in the 60s and 70s, you saw GDP growth to be at 2%, 1%, 2% rate. And it wasn't until the 1980s that reform started, where the private sector was allowed to take on greater role. And in 1991, the government realized the baton for growth was passed on to the private sector, and because of the important role in terms of the entrepreneurship, the creativity, the vibrancy with which the private sector could play, that was well recognized. And indeed, if you look at some of the largest companies in India today, started in the 1980s from scratch. Sunil Mittal, Dhirubhai Ambani started their companies in 1980s from scratch. And those companies have become the largest companies in India. So the potential is absolutely huge in terms of what MSMEs can achieve. But what's the environment that's needed for MSMEs to succeed? Okay, one, from the government side, it's very important that there be rule of law. Rule of law is very important. Predictability of the legal and regulatory environment is also very, very key. Transparency with which decisions are made, approvals are given, the timeliness in which approvals are given is very, very key. In China, for example, you have companies that can start operations within 30 days. They may need approvals from 6, 7, 8, 9 ministries, but the way they have organized themselves is they have a one-stop shop. And in that one-stop shop, meaning a one building, they've got the different ministries side by side in booths. So after you go from one ministry, Ministry 1, you get the approval. You need approval from Ministry 2. You don't have to go from one end of the town to another town or another part of the town and go through a labyrinth of corridors waiting for hours, if not days, to get approval. But you go to the next booth and your application is processed. So you know exactly where you have to go, you know what the time is going to take. So within 30 days, one is able to establish a business. And no wonder China today is leading global economic growth. So the other aspect is very clearly, and that has been mentioned, is access to capital. Access to capital for MSMEs, because who are the owners of MSMEs? Who are the promoters? These are people, individuals, who don't have large pools of capital, but they have ideas. They have that risk-taking spirit, and they need the capital. So access to capital is vital. They are prepared to put whatever they have in terms of savings, but more is required. Now, access to capital is not only something that what is the government's responsibility, but it is also the responsibility of the company themselves. It is something that ASSOCHAM, Chamber of Commerce, needs to understand, and I'm sure they do, but how it can be improved. How can companies, MSMEs, have greater access to capital? It is all about, fundamentally, good corporate governance. When the fiscal deficit is high, there is basically driving out private capital. You are making capital more expensive for others because the government is a sovereign entity. The risks are zero, theoretically. People will want to invest in government paper. So the more government paper there is, the less supply there is of capital available for the rest of the sector. This drives up pure economics, demand and supply. This drives up the cost of capital. So when fiscal deficit will come down, it will have an impact on the cost of capital.